My name is Helen Moore. I'm the widow of Arthur Moore, founder of Moore & Sons Jewelry, one of the oldest family-run businesses in the country. I was married to him for almost 50 years, a lifetime during which I witnessed both the rise and the crises of our company up close. We have 2 children, Edward the eldest, who has always been involved in running the business, and Marianne, more reserved, devoted to the family's social life. For a long time, the Moore name was synonymous with success. But behind appearances, there was much more than the public ever imagined. I want you to know that I'm relieved to finally share my story. Thank you to the channel Buried by Family for listening to me. Please like this video before we continue, it really helps. Now, listen to my story. The sound of the organ was still echoing when I stepped into the main hall. The air smelled of lilies and incense, a sweet, suffocating perfume, almost insolent in the face of grief. Arthur Moore was there, or rather, what was left of him, my husband, my companion, for nearly 50 years, the man the world called a business genius, the patriarch of the Moore family, the mind behind the jewelry empire. As I walked toward the casket, every step felt like a test of endurance, not because of sorrow, but because of everything that came with it. The stares, the whispers, and, most of all, the silence of my own children. Edward and Marianne stood side by side, immaculate in their black suits, like hosts at a social event, not a funeral. When they saw me, they only nodded, polite and distant, as if I were some estranged aunt. No embrace, no mom, just the dry formality, too polished to hide the contempt. People watched me discreetly. I could feel it, that uneasy curiosity that fills a room when everyone knows something you haven't yet said. And then began what I call the performance. The microphone came on, the music stopped, and Edward took the podium. My father was the most honest and visionary man I've ever known, he began, his voice steady, controlled. He built this empire through hard work, courage, and faith. Everything we are today, we owe to him. The audience nodded, moved. Some even applauded me. I remained still. The speech went on, and in 10 whole minutes, my name was not mentioned once. Then came Marianne's turn. She cried softly, in a carefully rehearsed tone. My father was my greatest role model. He taught me never to give up, to be strong, to have vision. And then she looked at me just for a second, before quickly looking away, as if avoiding a mirror. That was the moment I realized they had erased me. The mother who stayed awake when their father slept, the woman who kept the company afloat when he fell apart, the foundation no one sees because the base never appears in the picture. 2 guests behind me whispered. Strange, isn't it, said a woman. I heard she was the one who kept everything running back when they nearly went bankrupt, replied another. I pretended not to hear, but inside me, something stirred, something old, weary, and powerful. That was his farewell ceremony. But deep down, the one coming back to life was me. When the funeral ended, the hall emptied slowly. People came up to me one by one, offering the usual phrases, my condolences. He'll be missed. What an extraordinary man. I smiled, nodded, thanked them. But every word fell like rain on dry ground. It didn't sink in. It didn't touch me. Grace, my friend of decades, approached. Her eyes were misty, but her gaze was as sharp as ever. Helen, how do you stand it? You learn, I answered simply. After so many years, I've learned that silence says more than any defense. Grace held my hand. They had no right to ignore you like that. Everyone saw it. It was humiliating. I shook my head. They didn't humiliate me, Grace. They just confirmed who they are. The memory pulled me back in time, 15 years earlier. Arthur had just lost a major contract. Moore & Sons was on the brink of bankruptcy. The banks were closing in, employees threatening to strike, and he was locked in his office, repeating that it was the end. It was me who called the suppliers. Me who sold the family jewels, who mortgaged the house my father left me. Me who packed a suitcase and went from city to city, trying to convince partners to believe in the Moore name again. I remember the night I came home. Arthur was waiting in the living room, his head bowed. I don't know what I'd do without you, Helen. You don't have to know, I said. Just don't erase me when things get better. He smiled. And, like so many men of his generation, he made a promise he never had the courage to keep. The days following the funeral were a parade of hypocrisy. Newspapers, magazines, television shows, All wanted to talk about the legacy of Arthur Moore, old photos, sentimental headlines, glowing quotes about success and leadership. I watched it all from a distance, through the window of the mansion, the same mansion where I raised my children, sewed uniforms, served coffee to shareholders, and hid tears in silence. Edward came by every day to handle administrative matters, but in truth, he was just staking his claim. He'd walk into his father's office, sit in his chair, and start giving orders to employees who, for years, had learned more from me than from him. "Mother, the lawyer will be reading the will on Friday," he said coldly. "Good," I replied, flatly, "and I hope everything is handled fairly." "Fairly?" he asked, avoiding my gaze. "Fairly," I repeated. "Or, conveniently." He looked away, pretending to shuffle papers. Marianne, on the other hand, avoided coming to the house altogether. She called now and then, her voice soft but artificial. "Mom, are you doing okay?" "I am. Better than you might think." She had always feared confrontation. But I knew, behind that gentleness was the same vanity as her father's, and the same ingratitude as her brother's. One night, I sat in Arthur's old office. I opened the desk's hidden drawer, the one where he kept his old documents. There it was, the original will, and beside it, a note in his handwriting. "Helen, if you ever read this, know that there never would have been any empire without you. But pride is a cruel vice. I hope one day the world recognizes what I never had the courage to say." I folded the paper carefully, took a deep breath, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I called the family attorney, Robert Hayes, a serious man, discreet, reliable. "Mrs. Moore, I'm so sorry for your loss. How can I help you?" "I want to make changes to the will," I replied, "and I don't want anyone to know until the day it's read." There was a pause on the other end. "I understand. How would you like to proceed?" "I want to create the Helen Moore Foundation. It will receive 70% of the company's shares and will be managed by me, until I decide who's ready to take over." Robert hesitated. "This will cause a war, Mrs. Moore." "The fairest wars always do," I said. I spent the afternoon reviewing documents, signed papers, sealed envelopes, made sure every detail was in order. That night, I sat on the veranda with a cup of tea and looked out over the garden. The city lights flickered in the distance. It felt as though the whole world was asleep, except for me. For years, I let others tell my story for me, I thought. But now, it's time I write the final chapter myself. And so, before the reading of the will, the addendum was completed, sealed, official, and kept in absolute secrecy. They think the funeral marked the end of an era. Little do they know, it was the beginning of my justice. Friday dawned gray, as if even the sky itself hesitated. The gates of the Moore mansion opened slowly. Luxury cars rolled in one by one, distant relatives, company executives, lawyers, and the merely curious. At the center of the main hall, the table was set with white flowers and a single envelope sealed with red wax. The will. Edward arrived first. Black tie, expression of entitlement. Marianne came soon after, immaculate, carrying a designer bag that seemed heavier than her conscience. I stayed silent. I sat in Arthur's old armchair, not out of nostalgia, but out of right. When attorney Robert Hayes entered, everyone straightened up. The scraping of chairs echoed like thunder. "Let's begin," he said, opening the envelope. Mr. Arthur Moore left clear instructions regarding the distribution of his estate. Edward adjusted his tie. Marianne crossed her legs, poised for victory. "The total estate, valued at $120 million, will be divided between his two children, Edward and Marianne Moore." A smile began to form on their faces, but Robert continued, carefully, taking into account, however, the existence of an addendum dated and notarized 3 days ago, requested by Mrs. Helen Moore. Silence. The air itself seemed to grow heavy. "The addendum stipulates that 70% of Moore & Sons jewelry shares are to be transferred to the Helen Moore Foundation, established to support women over 50 seeking to restart their careers." What followed was the purest silence imaginable. Edward went pale. Marianne choked on her own breath. "This is a joke," Edward said, standing up. "Father would never allow something like this. Father is gone." "Edward," I replied, steady. "And when he was bankrupt, it was me who rebuilt everything. Mother, this is a betrayal." Marianne cried, "You can't do this to us." "I can." And I did. Robert cleared his throat. The document is valid and was signed in full legal and mental capacity. Edward's glare could have burned through steel. You're destroying father's legacy. No, I said. I'm saving what's left of its dignity. The Moore name was always used to climb. Now it will be used to lift other women. And in that moment, I realized the most elegant revenge is the one disguised as justice. The news spread faster than the wind. By the next morning, newspapers and websites were flooded with headlines. Widow of Arthur Moore takes control of the empire. Women's Foundation inherits $1 million fortune. Magnate's children contest father's will. I gave no interviews, but my image, that woman in black with a calm, unreadable gaze, was everywhere. Grace called me. Helen, the whole country's talking about you. Let them talk, I said. For once, they're talking for the right reason. Edward, on the other hand, couldn't bear the exposure. He spent the entire day trying to deny everything. He called journalists, threatened lawsuits. Marianne cried on television, claiming I had poisoned our father. I didn't defend myself. Sometimes, silence is the loudest scream there is. But that night, when the house finally went quiet, the pain came. Not because of the money, but because of the distance. The gap between mother and children had become an ocean. I took out the note Arthur had left. I thought of his flaws, his arrogance, but also his fear. And I wondered, had they inherited more from him than just his name? I walked to the hallway mirror. The reflection startled me. A woman with silver hair, strong but tired. For a fleeting second, I saw the young woman I once was. The one who believed love and loyalty were enough. You took your time, Helen, I whispered to my reflection. But you made it, just in time. 3 days later, I received an unexpected visit from Edward. Without warning, he stormed into the room and slammed the door behind him. You've destroyed everything, he shouted. The company's in chaos. The shareholders are panicking. Panicking because a woman is in charge, I asked. Because you're too old for this. I stayed silent for a few seconds, the kind of silence that weighs heavy in the air. Then I stood up slowly, deliberately. Say that again. Looking me in the eye, he hesitated. But pride won. Too old. No vision. Old enough to rebuild what you would have let collapse, I said, stepping closer. You were born with the name. I made the name mean something. He looked at me with a mix of hatred and fear. A new kind of fear. The fear of losing control. You'll regret this, Mother. Maybe, I replied, but so will you. And my regrets, Edward, have never cost as much as yours will. He left, slamming the door behind him. And in that moment, I understood, a mother's love is a bond, but it can also be a weapon. In the days that followed, I began working officially at the foundation. I visited the company's old building, walking through each floor, each corridor, studying every framed photograph. At the end of one hallway, I found an old picture, Arthur and me, smiling, holding hands. The caption read, "The couple who built an empire." Built, I thought. No, rebuilt. And now, it's being reborn. The first day of the Helen Moore Foundation felt like a new dawn. Women of all ages arrived with folders, resumes, ideas, and dreams. Some cried when they saw me. Others simply smiled, as if recognizing their own strength reflected back at them. A young woman named Sophie Kim, 28, approached me. "Mrs. Moore, may I speak with you?" "Of course, dear. I lost my job after I got pregnant. No one wanted to hire me again. I thought my future was over." "And what brought you here?" I asked. "I saw your interview. When you said, 'Time doesn't erase those who have purpose.' I saw myself in that sentence." I took her hand gently. "Time doesn't erase, Sophie. It reveals. And what you are, the world still needs to see." In that moment, I felt the foundation gain its soul. It wasn't about charity, it was about reparation. A way to give back what the world so often steals from women: recognition. At the end of the day, I sat in the garden and closed my eyes. The wind carried faint voices from the past, from my children, from Arthur. But now, none of them could hurt me anymore. They tried to erase me at the funeral, I thought, but they never realized they were witnessing my rebirth. The war wasn't over yet. And sometimes, justice awakens the darkest side of those who never learned how to lose. 2 weeks after the reading of the will, I received a court summons. Edward and Marianne had filed a petition to annul the addendum. The argument was predictable. Helen Moore was emotionally unstable following her husband's death and was influenced by outside parties. I smiled as I read it. The irony was cruel. I'd spent half my life being accused of being too cold, too rational, and now they claimed I was unstable. Robert Hayes called me right away. Helen, they're trying to argue emotional incapacity. Of course they are, I said. It's the only way to make me look weak without saying it's because I'm a woman. Would you like to respond now? Or wait for the hearing? No, Robert. I'll respond in kind, but not in court. Not yet. That night was long. I walked through the house in silence, looking at old photographs, my children as toddlers, Arthur's smile, birthdays, parties. Everything felt like a museum of false memories. Then I heard a noise on the veranda. It was Marianne. High heels, puffy eyes. Mother, I didn't want things to get this far. Then why did they? Because you took everything from us. I took what you never valued. There's a difference. Edward's desperate mom. He thinks the family name is going to be ridiculed. The family name already was, sweetheart, from the inside. We're just cleaning the front now. She looked at me with a mix of guilt and anger. You've always had that tone. You know. What tone? That tone of someone who always thinks she's right. I sighed. No, dear. I just learned that when you're a woman, you have to sound twice as right for people to take you seriously once. Marianne lowered her head. So, this is war. No, my dear, I said softly. It's consequence. The next morning, my assistant called me in a panic. Mrs. Moore, your son is giving an exclusive interview tonight. Where? On the national network. He's going to say, you manipulated your husband and embezzled company funds. For a moment, my blood froze. Then that old instinct returned, the calm of women who have already survived everything. I watched the interview alone, in the living room. The host asked questions the way one throws poison wearing silk gloves. So, Mr. Moore, you believe your mother wasn't of sound mind. I believe she lost control. My father was the brain. She merely was there. The words cut like knives, but the final blow came at the end. Edward, if your mother is watching right now, what would you say to her? That she destroyed our family's legacy. And that I'll take it back no matter the cost. I turned off the TV. Silence, absolute and heavy. Then came the sound of notifications. Hundreds of messages, half of them hating me, half of them applauding. The next morning, photographers surrounded the foundation. But I refused to hide. I stepped onto the stage of the auditorium, and microphone in hand, spoke to the women gathered there. They say I've lost control. Maybe they're right. I've lost the need to please, the habit of staying silent, the instinct to accept, and it's the best loss I've ever had. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I realized I was no longer a shadow. I was a voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went into the office, now my office, and sat in Arthur's old chair. I opened the drawer where he used to keep his old letters. Among yellowed papers and faded photographs, I found a cassette tape. On the label, written in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Helen, in case I never find the courage to say it in life." I took it to the old tape player, pressed play. His trembling voice filled the room. "Helen, if you're hearing this, it means time has finally beaten my pride. I know I was wrong. I made you carry the weight of an empire, and I gave you the title of wife when I should have given you the title of partner. The kids, they never understood what you did, but one day they will. And if they don't, may they at least fear you, because their respect is long overdue." The tape stopped. I sat for several minutes, completely still. Tears fell, but they were warm, not from pain, but from release. "You left me alone, Arthur, but you also left me free." I placed the recorder back into its box and wrote across the lid, proof that the truth always finds its voice. The next morning, I called Robert Hayes. "Robert, I found something that might end this war. A confession, a memory," I said, "recorded, and enough." The courtroom was packed. Journalists, onlookers, former employees, even a few old rivals of the company. Edward and Marianne sat side by side, their expressions cold and distant. When they called me to testify, I walked to the center of the room. The cameras followed every step. "Mrs. Moore," the judge said, "your children claim that you acted out of emotional impulse. Would you like to respond?" "I would," I replied, my voice steady, and not with words. I looked at Robert, who stood and placed the cassette into a small portable player. Arthur's trembling voice filled the courtroom. "She carried the weight of the empire, and I gave her the name of wife when I should have called her partner. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Marianne covered her mouth. Edward turned pale. When the recording ended, I looked at the judge. I didn't come here to prove that I'm right. I came to remind you that truth doesn't depend on who shouts the loudest. The judge nodded, thoughtful. Days later, the ruling was announced. The addendum was valid. The foundation upheld. Edward left the courtroom without looking back. Marianne approached me quietly. Mother, don't say anything, dear. I just want to understand why you did all this, because one day, you'll have children of your own, and maybe then you'll realize that love isn't about yielding, it's about teaching, she cried. And for a moment I wanted to hold her, but I restrained myself. Some bridges need to remain burned, to light the way forward. Justice was served, but peace was not. Because there are wounds that no verdict can close, only remorse can. The court's decision echoed like thunder. Addendum upheld. The Helen Moore Foundation recognized as the legitimate heir. The press turned it into a spectacle. Cameras, headlines, commentators everywhere. I appeared on television shows, magazine covers, even in memes. But inside the house, the sound was different. Victory had the bitter taste of solitude. Grace came to visit that evening, carrying flowers and her usual homemade cake. Congratulations, Helen. You won. Won what, Grace? I asked, staring into the emptiness of the room. A case, or myself? She looked at me with that familiar tenderness. Sometimes winning just means surviving without losing who you are. And sometimes, I said softly, it means losing everything, just to remember who you were. I sat at the table. The clock read 10:10 p.m. The same hour when, 40 years ago, Arthur and I used to sit down to review the company's accounts. I remembered his laugh, the way he adjusted his glasses, the heavy silence before the I'm sorries that never came. You left me the empire, Arthur, but you also left me the burden of being the villain in my own story. I opened the window. Outside, the city slept, and for the first time, I felt the weight of all those years pressing down on me. I didn't regret it, but I couldn't celebrate either. Justice is cold, and vengeance, colder still. 2 weeks later, the downfall began. Newspapers announced Edward Moore sells shares to cover personal debts. Marianne Moore withdraws from public life and cancels appearances. The empire they had glorified for so long was crumbling, not because of me, but because of their own greed. One morning, I received an anonymous letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Marianne's. I opened it carefully. The message was short. Mother, I don't want money. I just wanted to understand why Mr. Arthur loved you so much and hurt you just the same, and why I ended up doing the same thing. I held the paper for several minutes, motionless. Then I folded it and placed it in the drawer, beside the tape. Because love, my dear, love makes mistakes too. And when we don't learn, we repeat them. That same day, more news came. Edward had been seen leaving the company with a team of lawyers. I soon learned he was trying to sell the Moore name to a foreign brand. The name isn't his, I thought. It's mine, paid for with blood, sleepless nights, and a lifetime of silence. That afternoon, I called Robert Hayes. Robert, I want to register the Moore name as a historical asset of the foundation that would block any sale attempts. Exactly. I want the name to serve good, not ego. When he left, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter, but my heart still felt tight. It was autumn. The garden was covered in fallen leaves, and the wind carried that bittersweet scent of farewell. I spent the morning reviewing the foundation's programs, workshops, scholarships, mentorships. 100 women had already been helped, 100 stories of starting over. Sophie Kim, my assistant, came in smiling. Mrs. Moore, there's someone here to see you. Who is it? Your son. Edward. For a moment, the ground seemed to vanish beneath me. I hadn't seen him since the trial. He walked in thinner, tired eyes, unshaven. The arrogance was gone. Only exhaustion remained. Mother, I didn't come to ask for anything. Then, for the first time, we're off to a good start, I replied. Silence. He took a deep breath. I've lost everything. I made bad investments, trusted the wrong people. And now you want what? To understand how Mr. Arthur always forgave you. I looked at him, startled. Arthur never forgave me, Edward. He only learned to respect me when it was already too late. He turned his gaze away, eyes glistening. I wish I could go back, Mother. So do I, son. But if time turned back, what would you change? I would have listened to you. The answer was simple, sincere. and it broke something inside me. I stepped closer. Pride is a kind of inheritance, Edward, the worst kind. But it's still one you can break. He nodded silently. We said goodbye with a brief, hesitant, but genuine embrace. When he left, I looked up at Arthur's portrait and whispered, one has begun to understand, and the other, perhaps, he's listening, somewhere. Months went by. The foundation grew. I was invited to speak at conferences, received awards, gave interviews, but what moved me most were the letters from women who had started over at 50, 60, 70. Women who wrote, I saw you on TV and realized it's not too late. One afternoon, Sophie came in, visibly flustered. Mrs. Moore, there's a man here to see you. He says it's urgent. Name? He only said, Robert Hayes. Robert walked in, holding an envelope. Helen, Arthur left another document. We found it among the company's old archives. I opened it, my hands trembling. It was a letter, simple, dated a year before his death. Helen, if you ever decide to go on without me, do so knowing that nothing I built would have existed without your faith. History will judge you, but it will also absolve you. And when our children finally see you for who you truly are, there will be no harsher judgment than their own remorse. I closed my eyes. The wind swept through the window, making the curtains sway. It felt like a wave, or, perhaps, a farewell. I looked at Robert. You know, sometimes I think he did understand me. He just ran out of time to say it. Maybe, Robert said gently, because he knew you didn't need to hear it. You already knew. I sat down at the desk, and for the first time in many years, I cried without fear. It wasn't pain, it was peace. The peace of someone who finally understands that justice isn't vengeance, it's rest. The empire had crumbled, but the legacy was safe. And for the first time, the Moore name no longer weighed me down. It shone. It was a spring afternoon. The foundation's garden was in full bloom, more vibrant than ever. The women who had once arrived as students were now mentors, and their laughter filled the air with something I hadn't heard in years. Hope. As I watched them, Sophie approached. Mrs. Moore, a special letter just arrived. From whom? I don't know. The envelope's blue, no return address. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, instantly recognizable. Marianne, Mother, I've been silent because I didn't know what to say. I thought time would erase what happened, but it only showed me how much I judged you without understanding. I visited the foundation yesterday. No one knew who I was. I sat in the audience and listened to you speak about starting over. It was the first time I heard your voice without resistance. Now I understand what Mr. Arthur saw in you. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about continuing to believe after the fall. I let the letter fall onto the table and stood still. The world seemed suspended around me. Outside, the flowers swayed in the breeze, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. At the bottom of the page, there was an invitation. May I see you? I just want to talk. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. I had dreamed of those words so many times, but now that they had come, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. Sometimes forgiveness hurts more than the wound, I thought, because it forces us to remember everything. Marianne arrived on a rainy morning, wearing a gray coat and a look of regret. Sophie opened the door and glanced at me, silently asking, should I let her in? I nodded. She stepped inside slowly, taking in every detail. It's beautiful here, Mother. It's what's left when you choose to plant instead of demand, I replied. We sat across from each other at a small cafe table. The sound of rain filled the pauses between our words. I didn't come to apologize, she began, her voice trembling. Because I know no apology can erase what I've done. Then why did you come? To tell you that I understand. Understand what? That you always wanted to teach us to be strong. But we mistook strength for coldness. I stayed quiet. She went on. I always wanted Father's approval. And whenever he praised you, I felt jealous. I know, I said softly, and deep down, I wanted to be like you, Mother. That broke through my defenses. Tears came slow, quiet, unstoppable. Don't try to be like me, my dear. Be softer. No, she said gently. I want to be fair. The way you were. We reached across the table, our hands meeting halfway. For a long moment, we just sat there, two women who had lost each other trying to be understood. Before leaving, Marianne turned back to me. Edward wants to come too. Tell him he doesn't need permission. I will, but Mother, yes, he's still afraid of you. I smiled. Then he finally inherited something from his father. By the end of that summer, the foundation celebrated its first anniversary. We held a small ceremony, women who had started over, families who had been transformed. Among those honored was Sophie, now the program's coordinator. She spoke through tears. Before meeting Mrs. Moore, I thought my life had ended at 30. Today, I help other women begin again. Applause filled the room. And in the middle of the crowd, I saw something that made me catch my breath. Edward and Marianne, sitting side by side, quietly. After the event, they came up to me. Edward spoke first, his voice low and unguarded. I saw everything, Mother. You turned what was once an empire of vanity into something that's truly worth gold. Gold, I asked. Yes, the kind that survives the fire. Those words made me smile. Then Mr. Arthur taught you well. No, he said softly. You did, Mother. He just took the credit. We laughed together, for the first time in years. Marianne added, we want to be part of the foundation. Not for the name, but for the purpose. Are you sure? I asked. We are, and if you'll allow it, we'd like the new expansion project to bear his name. Whose name? Father's. I hesitated before answering, but I understood it wasn't about idolizing him anymore. It was about reconciling with what had shaped us. All right, I said. But the name will go on the plaque, and the heart, into the work. We embraced, and in that moment, it felt as if the old walls of the Moore House finally exhaled. A few months later, I was invited to speak at an international conference on women's leadership. The stage was enormous, the lights, blinding, cameras streamed the event live. I took a deep breath and began. For a long time, I was the shadow of a brilliant man. And when he was gone, I realized the shadow was never his, it was mine, because I was the one who dimmed my own light so he could shine. Today, I understand that inheritance isn't what's locked away in vaults, it's what still speaks your name with gratitude, long after you're gone. I paused and looked out at the audience. Among the faces, I saw Edward and Marianne sitting together, eyes filled with emotion, and I felt the weight of an entire lifetime lift. If they ever tell you you're too old, I continued, remember this, the strongest roots are the ones that have survived the most storms, and the purest gold is the one that has endured the fire. Applause erupted, long, genuine, thunderous applause, and within that sound I felt something new, true peace. That night, back on my veranda, I looked up at the starlit sky and whispered, Arthur, the empire is gone, but the legacy lives, and finally, I can rest. Silence. Then, a gentle breeze brushed past me. It felt like an answer. Legacy is what time can never erase, and so ends the story of the woman who was erased at a funeral, but reborn in memory. Time passed like a wind that gives no warning. Mornings at the foundation had become my new ritual. The smell of coffee, distant laughter, the soft tapping of keyboards, and that rare, grounding sense of purpose. Edward and Marianne were now part of the board. They worked quietly, with humility. The Moore name had returned to the headlines, but this time for the right reasons. Social impact. A magazine ran the headline, From Empire to Legacy, the woman who turned inheritance into hope. I laughed softly to myself as I read it. For years, I'd been portrayed as the bitter widow, the villain of the will. Now they called me a visionary. But I knew the truth. What had made me strong was never a vision, it was endurance. That afternoon, Marianne stepped into my office. Mother, the international sponsors want to expand the program to Europe. Europe, yes, they want to open the first branch in London. London, I murmured, gazing out the window. The city where your father made his very first business deal. She smiled. It's like the circle is closing, or opening again, I said. The end is only the beginning, told a different way. One morning, when I arrived at the foundation, Sophie handed me an envelope. It came early today, she said. From an old address, from before Mr. Arthur passed away. The envelope was yellowed, sealed with an old stamp. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to me, signed by Arthur Moore, Helen. I know that time has separated us in ways that even death will not undo. But I want you to know that if one day our children doubt you, it's only because they haven't lived long enough to understand what it means to carry a name and still be invisible. One day, perhaps they'll realize what I understood too late, that a woman's strength isn't measured by what she endures, but by what she builds while the world doubts her. If this letter finds you, I hope you found the peace I never knew how to give. I stood still, holding the paper in both hands. The clock on the wall read 10:45, but time itself seemed suspended. Every word was a mirror reflecting who we were, and who we might have been. I sat down, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Arthur, you took too long, but you made it." I placed the letter in the drawer of my desk, beside the tape and the other keepsakes. There, not only the past rested, but the proof that truth always finds its way, even when the world tries to bury it. The autumn wind swept golden leaves across the foundation's garden. I walked more slowly now, but every step was filled with gratitude. Sophie would often come to help me, but I insisted on walking alone. "Mrs. Moore, you need to rest. The body rests when purpose ends, my dear. Mine hasn't ended yet." That afternoon, the board gathered for a meeting. Edward presented the expansion reports, and Marianne outlined the new scholarship programs. The pride I felt, watching them work side by side, was indescribable. At the end of the meeting, they called me up to the stage. "Mother," Marianne said, "we have a surprise." The screen behind them lit up. Old images began to appear, photos of Arthur and me, the first stores, board meetings, sleepless nights, and then, a new plaque appeared on the screen. The Helen and Arthur Moore Foundation, for women who build the impossible. The audience broke into applause. But what brought tears to my eyes wasn't the name, it was the look in my children's eyes. There was no guilt there anymore, only love. After the ceremony, I sat in the garden. Edward approached quietly. "Mother, may I ask you something? Of course, when Father died, did you still love him?" I smiled. "Love changes form, son. Sometimes it becomes longing, sometimes it becomes faith, but true love, it never dies. It only transforms into legacy." He nodded, eyes glistening. "And us, Mother, what are we in your legacy?" "You're the proof," I said softly, "that even mistakes can bloom if the remorse is real." The wind rose, scattering the leaves. The sun sank slowly, painting everything in gold, and I thought, perhaps the true empire is this, the grace of knowing how to leave in peace. The years that followed passed in calm and quiet rhythm. The foundation grew, crossing borders and oceans. The walls of its headquarters were now covered with photographs of smiling women, each one a story of struggle and rebirth. One afternoon, Sophie brought me an album. "Mrs. Moore, we gathered all the photos and messages from the women you've helped. It's our gift to you." "Thank you, my dear," I said softly. "This is worth more than any inheritance." I ran my fingers over the pages, faces, hands, eyes. Each smile was a brick in what I had rebuilt from the pieces of myself. That night, I sat on the veranda, the same place where, so many times, I had thought about giving up. The sky was clear, and the sound of the wind seemed to whisper my name. I closed my eyes. Time has passed, but for the first time, it hasn't taken anything from me. It has only brought voices that won't be silenced. It brought children who learned. It brought peace, the kind that no longer fears silence. I smiled. "Arthur, I did it." And then, the sound of the city blended with the rustle of leaves. It sounded like applause, or farewell, or perhaps both. 5 years had passed since the foundation's inauguration. The world had changed, and so had I. The wrinkles on my face now told better stories than any old headline. My voice, once tired from defending itself, now spoke only when it had something to teach. That Monday morning, as I walked into the Helen Moore Foundation, I noticed something different. It was no longer mine. It belonged to everyone. The women who had once arrived there filled with fear and doubt were now leading projects, giving lectures, starting businesses. The sound of laughter, hurried footsteps, and ideas being debated in the hallways, it all played like music. Sophie approached, that familiar spark in her eyes reminding me of who I once was when it all began. "Mrs. Moore, we need to talk." "When you say it like that," I said, smiling, "it's because you're about to change the world again." She laughed softly. "Maybe just a small piece of it. The truth is, I think it's time for you to rest. Rest, not to stop," she said gently. "To pass the torch. You've always said that a true leader is the one who teaches others to lead." I stayed silent for a moment, looking around. Every wall, every picture, every face was a living memory of what had once begun as pain and turned into purpose. "Sophie, are you sure?" "I am. And with your blessing, I'd like to officially apply for the presidency." "You don't need my blessing, my dear," I said, smiling through the warmth in my chest. "It's already yours." I was just keeping it safe until you were ready. We embraced for a long moment. And right then, I understood. Surrendering power is the most noble act of those who earned it with dignity. The auditorium was full. Journalists, former students, sponsors, families, all had come to witness the ceremony. On stage, the golden banner read, "The Helen Moore Foundation, where women begin again." Sophie went up first, dressed in white. I wore light blue, the color Arthur used to say made you look calm, even when you were ready to set the world on fire. Applause filled the room as the music faded. Sophie spoke first. "When I arrived here, I believed my life was over. Helen Moore showed me that the end is only the beginning we haven't discovered yet. Today, she gives me the greatest gift a teacher can offer, trust." Then they called me to the podium. I looked out at that sea of faces and took a deep breath. When I founded this home, I thought I was rewriting my story. But today, I understand I only opened the book so others could write theirs. Sophie Kim will be the new president, and I will finally be what I always wanted to be, a mentor, not of positions, but of courage. The applause grew and grew. In the crowd, I saw Edward and Marianne smiling with pride. Their eyes said everything. You won, and we learned. And in that moment, I realized that succession was not an ending. It was the full circle, from seed to fruit. Months went by. Life had slowed to a gentler pace. I still visited the foundation every day, but now, as a guest, Sophie led the meetings, the trips, the partnerships, and she did it all with a new kind of light, different from mine, softer, more modern, more daring. One afternoon, she came to my house with a proposal. "Mrs. Moore, I want to start a new program, scholarships for older women who want to go back to university. And I want to call it Project Helen Lives On." I smiled. "You know that name will move me every single time I hear it." "That's the point," she said. "You taught us that no one is ever too old to begin again. I want the whole world to remember that." We embraced, one of those long, wordless hugs that say everything that needs to be said. Later, I sat on the veranda, watching the garden. The flowers looked more vivid, the winds softer, and I thought, passing on what I built didn't take anything away from me, it completed me. 3 years later, the foundation celebrated its 10th anniversary. The event was held in London, the city where Arthur had signed his first contract, and where now the Moore name gleamed on a new plaque. Helen Moore, International Center for Women's Leadership. Sophie took the stage to speak. I sat in the front row, with Edward and Marianne beside me. As she began, I felt a quiet, profound pride rise within me. 10 years ago, a woman decided that her story wouldn't end at a funeral. Today, she stands here alive, inspiring, smiling, reminding us all that to begin again is the most powerful verb there is. This is our founder, the woman who turned pain into purpose, Helen Moore. The lights turned toward me. I rose slowly. Applause filled the hall, long, heartfelt, almost endless. I took the microphone. "Life has taught me that there are two kinds of empires, the one you build with your hands, and the one you build with your heart. The first will one day end, the second never will. I'm still here not to lead, but to witness, because the greatest privilege in life is seeing what we've planted bloom in someone else's hands." I looked at Sophie, at my children, at the sea of faces before me. And if anyone ever asks me what legacy means, I'll say this: legacy is love that continues, even when there's nothing left to prove. Applause again, strong, sincere, endless. And I smiled, thinking at last, peace not of ending, but of continuity. The purest gold is the kind that turns into light, and that's how I finished telling my story. Tell me in the comments, what would your reaction have been? I want to thank this channel, Buried by Family, for allowing me to share this part of my life with you. This channel needs your support to keep bringing more stories like this one. So click the subscribe button. That way, other women will also be able to share their truths here. On the screen, there's another video you might like, and the icon to subscribe to the channel.